Nick and P, welcome back, motherfucker. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you.
Something you said last week kind of got my wheels turning. And in talking to you last week, you said that there's beauty in the proverbial struggle, right? And I think when you look at it that way, like looking back, sometimes you could look at the beautiful part of like what came out of that struggle. But I think sometimes when you're in the struggle, it's hard to notice it, when you're in the middle of a fight, like it's hard to recognize like the beauty of that. And I won't get into specifics, but especially with you, I've seen you where you're in a fight and you're having a tough time, but like your heart just like drives you on. And then I've seen you prep for a fight and I saw your will and determination just like as you were training. And then in that fight, I saw you just fucking go, right? Like there's something inside of you that has this inner strength. Where does that come from?
I think that comes from, I feel like, oh man, it comes from a few places. And I hate saying it, but I feel like a lot of it comes from your ego and like a sense of pride in defining who you are. I also feel like there's a competitive nature sometimes in thinking, and again, I think this is ego related, in thinking that if you're not doing the work or going hard enough, like there's someone who's going to be doing it. So it's a matter of just not letting yourself slip. But I hate that feeling of like comparing yourself against other people. But for me, that feeling comes from knowing that like someone, I mean, particularly for like a boxing match, it's like, someone's going to be going harder than you. So you really need to bring your tempo every day when you show up. But even in day-to-day life, if you just compare yourself to your surroundings, even though I don't think that's necessarily a very healthy thing to do, but I think if you do it and think about how it can motivate you to just be a better sense of yourself, then that's how I catch myself staying motivated like that.
Okay, well, let me split this in two ways then. First, we'll go with sport, and I agree with you. Now, I didn't always have that. Like growing up in a single parent household, my mom was always like, good enough is good enough. You tried, like as long as you tried, like solid. And it wasn't till I was like in my late teens, early 20s, where one of my homeboys confronted me. And he's just like, every fucking time it gets tough, like when we're boxing, you stop. Like, okay, I'm done. I'm tired. Every time that you're surfing and you get tired, you stop. Like where if you would have gone an extra round, if you would have paddled an extra little bit more, you'd have caught that wave. You'd have done that, right? And at first I took it as an affront, but then I took it as in just like, nah, like that's real talk. And I think that that's where my will and my work and my effort comes in, especially when I'm in competition. I vie with what you said. Like there is not another motherfucker that's going to outwork me. My will determine how this goes, and I'm willing to bet on my will. But it took for someone to have that conversation with me to lead to that push. Did you always? Is
Yeah.
that just natural for you, or did you get that from somewhere?
No, I'll kind of back off of that. And now that I'm thinking about it, I feel like my first experiences of understanding like where motivation can come from was when I first started playing football in high school. And that was my first real experience, because it's a physical sport and it's a demanding one, in a sense that not only do you need to put the work in the weight room and in the practice field, but you've also got to work just as hard as the boys next to you. And then you've got not only your peers expecting you to be pulling the weight that they're pulling, but then you have your coaches above you who are also looking at you to set an example on top of that. So I've also, from that experience, you have your peers, and then those who are coaching you, expecting you to bring that work. And what that did for me is it kind of taught me, not only how to motivate myself for the team, but it taught me how to lead by example. And even today, that's been like my biggest thing, is like, I'm not much of a dictator per se. I don't like telling people what to do, but I do like to set the fucking pace really high and just show that if I can go that hard, you can go that hard, and becomes like a team element in that sense. So I feel like my earliest taste of that, where I actually saw the rewards come, was like my early days of playing ball in high school.
And I think that sports speaks to life and life speaks to sports. And when I coach boxing, I tell people like you're going to find out a lot of yourself as you push yourself in this, right? And in looking, I did a short Google search, but like there's tons of self-help books out there, like people selling like mental toughness, mental strength, like it's like something easy to grasp, right? But here we're talking about like it takes work and it takes endurance. But when it comes to like real life and like dealing with that shit, you don't have a team. It's just kind of you by yourself having those conversations by yourself. How does that strength help you get through those tough times by yourself?
Man, definitely. It's hard. I feel like that isn't necessarily something that you develop on your own. I feel like you need some sort of outlet, or at least one other person or group to kind of help you discover what it means to push yourself to a limit, but also to be comfortable with uncomfortability, right? Like you have to learn to. Sometimes I tell people, like, when they're having a hard time, like, when you're really really deep in it, like, just, you got to be like a pig and draw yourself through the mud and enjoy being in the mud, because if you're not able to step back and just think like, you know what, this is hard work, I'm able to do it, I'm being tested, you know and also having some self-worth in yourself, and believing in yourself. So at the end of the day, if you're able to put enough belief in yourself, whether you fail or you succeed, at the end of the day, you're able to look at yourself in the mirror and say, hey, you know what, I gave it my shot, and that's the best I can do. But it's a challenge, man. I don't think there's really an answer for it. It's one of those things where it's a lot of practice, of constant self work and motivation from within.
And so I'll go with you with that. And that self-work ain't easy, you know,
No.
that and I think it goes back to what you said last time about having your support group, you know. And I think that for me, um, having this conversation with you is important because for me, you played such a crucial role in the mental strength that I have in my personal life. And
Mhm.
so a few years back, I hit a low, and I was having these conversations by myself in my head, but it wasn't working. And I'd call you almost every single day and pick you up and go for drives
Mhm.
just to kind of have these conversations and get it out there, right?
Mhm.
And one day I felt fine and I went out and I had about 4 beers and I hit the lowest low I've ever had in my entire life. I've never felt that way before, where I was just like, I was done. Like
Mhm.
I wanted to quit. I didn't want any more, but I knew I'd
Mhm.
been drinking, and I was like, if I quit, I can't do it drunk. You know, I can't do it drinking. I got to do this shit sober. And when I
Mhm.
woke up the next day, I'd lost all sense of self. I'd lost anything that I had. And so when I stripped all that shit down, like the only thing
Mhm.
that I had left was, one, I knew I wasn't a fucking quitter.
Mhm.
And two, I believed in my heart. Like I believe in the love that I have for others. And based off of that, like I trudged through the mud. And
Mhm.
I had that. And that's how I was able to build off of that. And that's what feeds my mental toughness now. Having to hit that low and fucking build from the bottom and discover my self-worth and who it is that I am. But that shit's not easy. And that's still something
Mhm.
that I deal with on an everyday basis.
Mhm.
So how do you deal with that on an everyday basis? Like shit that you carry from your history or your past, like how do you move on? How do you fight through?
Yeah, I had an interesting childhood, and kind of growing up. My parents argued a lot and divorced when I was pretty young, and they had quite a bit of conflict even through my teenage years, and it really set me, even outside of sports, it kind of left me feeling alone, right? Because you're pitted in between these two people who you care about, and it really made me pretty resilient with my emotions and my feelings, and it kind of taught me really early on that Sometimes you're going to be alone in life, and it's when you're alone is when you really have to understand and take a look into yourself and see what you're really worth, and try and have a better understanding of how you're feeling and how you're approaching just your perspective on life. But I agree with you. It takes a moment of not independence, but it takes a real serious moment of loneliness to really get a grasp of how powerful you can then be after that. And even now, like when sometimes I'm feeling down and feeling alone, and kind of questioning a lot of different things, I think about what it's taken me to get here, the people who are now counting on me to be there for them, whether it's professionally or whether it's emotionally or whatever. And it takes a little bit of time, but you come back and realize that you have a purpose, you're here for a reason, um, and that there's still a story to be told. But also at the end of the day, there's no quitting in me, and there's no quitting in you. And I think it boils down to that. Like there's no quit. There's getting beat up, but there's no quitting.
And I think that sometimes, like, you may lose your vision. Like, I know I lost my vision. I've always like seen the next route. Like, if I do this, this comes, right. And like, for a point, I lost that. And it was just about getting through day by day, like filling up that time with positive shit that is just like, I will be better somehow tomorrow. I will be better somehow tomorrow. And step by step, day by day, like, things came together and bam, got my vision back. And like, all right, cool, things are okay. And again, like, life is ride waves. There's going to be lows, there's going to be highs, but you got to kind of balance out and like know, like, your self-worth, that you're valuable to something, that you have people that depend on you. Like, I couldn't do it because I couldn't do that to my mom. I love that
Mm,
woman to death, and
mm,
I couldn't do that to her.
mm,
But there has to be some kind of drive in you to just be
mm.
like, I just got to get through today. And
Yeah,
then day by day they add up, and it's just like, okay, I'm in a better place.
I had somebody explain it to me a few years ago, and it made a lot of sense for me, at least at that point in time. But it still makes me think about that. Is when you're getting hit with some challenging times, he mentioned, what, man, like sometimes we get tested, but we get tested for a reason, and we get tested with things that we need to understand that we can overcome. you know like there are things that you're going to get hit with that no one else can be able to handle, but that's because you were meant to take on those challenges, because your character is of that worth to handle those challenges. Do you understand?
And I think
Like
it
there's
allows you to tell a story that only you could tell, because it is
Yeah.
your narrative. It is your lived experience. And that's kind of why I think we both wanted to do this, because we'd be able to talk with people at a level that's just fucking us as motherfuckers, but like about real life shit.
Yeah. And everyone's test, as unique as it is, and everyone's perspective differs on how extreme or challenging they are. Nonetheless, I really believe all of us are tested, um, for a particular reason, but I do not think that we are given tests that we cannot overcome.
I like that.
'Cause I feel, and that has really more currently has really helped me take a focus on how to stay, I think, emotionally strong, and not independent, but just definitely a little bit more resilient in just understand things that are thrown in front of you, um, are put there for a reason. So it's almost this fate versus free will kind of attitude that, you know there's a lot of things that I can do in this world, but there's also a lot of things that are out of my control, and it's understanding that those things are out of your control. um, it's really up to you then to be in control of your emotions and how you approach those problems. And it's helped me thinking more clear like that, to be able to handle shit like that.
And I think that, again, going back to last week, that's where it's just like this notion that everybody sells this positive image of everything that's going on. Like, nah, like, we have positive things going on in our life, but there's also a lot of shit that weighs us down that we go through day to day, right? And it's got to be communicated. It's got to be understood that we're all going through shit. No one's
Mhm.
life is just perfect and dandy and flowers and butterflies. Like, we're all going through something. And yeah, you want to keep the positive and vibe with that. get through the tough times, trudge through the mud, but you got to recognize that the whole picture, like we're all going through stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was at UCSB, I was studying communication with some emphasis in media and how we digest media, and I thought it was really interesting. I did a project and a pretty big essay on why we enjoy sad music, melancholy music. You know, like why, like it, because I listen to it, you listen to it, everyone listens to sad fucking music. And I was so curious, so I started reading all these research papers from these different professors from around the world, and it all comes down to this feeling of connectedness, right? Like you are not the only one who's feeling that way. Now, even though this is a fucking breakup song and you didn't deal with the breakup, you can still feel the emotions of feeling like shit. And it's this kind of, it's like a misery loves company thing, but it's also a cathartic experience, you know? So, and that's why I really appreciate the arts, man, is because like at those times when you are feeling alone and you might not have someone to talk about, like there's outlets and there's things, especially in the art world, that are out there to help us get a better understanding of the existence, the human existence and the human condition. So I also tapped in a lot to like artwork and music in those times as well. And it really kind of gave me a little bit more of a level headedness, because it was at those points when I was feeling really low, you know, and it sounds super fucking cliche, but you know, you put on a certain album, it'll make you feel even more like shit. But in a weird way, you're able to almost kind of like brush yourself off and wipe your face and kind of come back a little bit stronger.
And I think that adds to your humanity, because there was a long period of my life where I was scared to feel any type of emotions, and any type of emotion that I would feel, I would turn into anger. And again, that was my gang phase. And so it worked perfectly for me. Right. And now I'm at a place where it's just like, I want to feel, I want to understand what it's like to be me and all of the emotions that I carry. And I think music speaks to that. And I think that's where we ended last week, right? How Frank Sinatra, like I did it my way, allows you to kind of carry a motif in like a way, a vision of like how it is that you live your life. And I think that this week, again, we can see how like through the arts and through, again, this video that we're creating, it's a form of art. It's a way of us expressing ourselves to let others know that you're not alone, that there's other people that feel like you. We are interconnected. At the end of the day, we're all looking for some type of connectedness. And whether you find that through plays, whether you find that through music, whether you find that through movies, whether you find that through friendships, like at the end of the day, like recognize that you're not alone and that we're in this together.
Shout out Kanye, My Dark Twisted Fantasy, Lost in the World.
And
Check it
that's
out.
where we'll end. Kanye,
Yeah.
My Dark Twisted Fantasy. Word.